Rebecca Hutchinson, welcome to our Masters of the Air Debrief series.
Great. Good to be here. Thank you.
Now, we got connected through my boss, whose mother knows you. You guys grew up together. Can you tell, for everyone listening, how you're related to Masters of the Air and Harry Crosby?
Sure. I am Harry Crosby's youngest child. He's got 4, 2 boys and 2 girls, and I'm number 4, which is sometimes how he referred to me.
That's great. Now, were you born in Iowa or out in Boston?
Yeah, my oldest brother was born right at the very end of the war, and the rest, he was born in Missouri while my father was still overseas, and then the rest of us were born in Iowa City because my father was back at the University of Iowa teaching. So we're all Midwesterners. I moved east when I was 6.
And that's because your dad got a job. Was it at Harvard or Boston University?
He most of his career was at Boston University. After he retired, he worked briefly at the Writing Center at Harvard as a post-retirement, but most of his time was at Boston University.
That's great. Now, growing up, how early of an age did you recognize he served in the war in this big, great thing? Because I would imagine it was talked about a lot more then than it was now.
You know, I've given this a lot of thought. I knew at a pretty young age that he had been in the service, and part of it, when I look back, what I remember now is growing up in a navigator's home. So stuff like, you know, most kids, when they are going to give their dad a birthday present, I think maybe the go-to present is a tie or socks. But for my dad, it was a compass that would go on the car. In the 60s, you know, you could buy a compass and it would attach to the car, and they never worked very well. So it's like every 2 years we were buying him compasses, and I didn't realize until I was like 20, oh yeah, it was because he was a navigator that he wanted a compass on the car all the time. Or, you know, we always talked about ETA, you know, the estimated time of arrival for our trip. So those were the kinds of things. Or the other day I was talking to a friend and I said, well, I'm going to dead reckon to get there. And she said, what do you mean dead reckon? And I kind of laughed and I said, you didn't grow up in a navigator's home, did you? Because we always talked about dead reckoning. But I don't think we lived overseas in the 60s. My father took a break from teaching at Boston University and he worked with the Pakistan Air Force for 2 years. And then I was very aware because he occasionally wore his uniform again. So probably that was the first time I was really aware. But I grew up knowing the names of his wartime friends. Rosie, who you meet in, I think it's episode 4, it was a very, very close friend of Dad's, and we knew him pretty well. He was a wonderfully gentle, just the kindest guy, and humble, incredibly humble. So we remember him. Major Red Bowman, who's in the series, he was in our house all the time. I think he was a retread from World War I, if I'm not mistaken. He was older, but he was just, an old friend of my dad's as far as I knew. But Crankshaft, that's another one that's in the series. And this is an incredible coincidence, but I live in a small town 80 miles north of Boston of about 4,000 people. And many years ago, we found out that Crankshaft's son also lived in this tiny town. But his name was Steve Cruikshank. And when we figured it out, I said, are you Crankshaft's son? It's like, what? It's incredible. So I think it wasn't so much that I knew he was in the service, but I did know about his friends. He talked more about his friends than he did the actual experience of the war, at least with me. I think he did talk with my brothers a little bit more about them, but we were very aware of the friendships that he had from that time.
That sounds like the answer you want to hear, that the things you carry back with you, the things you talk about the most are the friends, the people you served with, the relationships you made more so than maybe some of the sadder or more difficult parts that I know must have been there.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely at least it's what he wanted to carry forward,
Yeah. I know you'd gone over and seen Thorpe Abbott, right? Or the some of the air bases?
Yeah, my older brother had this great idea that we ought to go back to Thorpe Abbotts with Dad. And I believe it was in the late 70s that they started refurbishing the base. And so the 100th Bomb Group, I think it was association then, it's now foundation, helped, went over and gave the volunteers over there advice. So we went back, I think it was for my father's 85th birthday. My mother died pretty young, so she was gone. And so the four kids went back with my father, just the five of us. It was just amazing to go up the steps of the control tower with him and him talking about, and this is something he had talked about, going up to the top of the control tower to count the planes coming back, so we walked up there with him. It's really something. And I've got a picture of him pointing to where his barracks were. He's looking over what is now fields and showing us where his barracks were. It was something. And I actually, my husband and I took our kids back there shortly after that, and we've been back since. The four kids, the four of us went back just 2 years ago to see the Masters of the Air sites and production. But being there with him, I can't describe it. It was incredibly special. And he was quiet. He was quiet when we were there.
I can only imagine. I mean, the ghosts of your past, but also there had to have been some kind of nostalgia, even knowing the situation they were in, just to be there where you were, because he was still in his 20s before the war ended, right? Early
Yeah,
20s?
I think he was 24 when he first went over. He was a little bit older than some because he was in graduate
Okay.
school when Pearl Harbor happened. He volunteered right after Pearl Harbor, so he
Yeah.
was in by January.
Such a young age over there. I mean, I'm glad at least that the show shows so much of him. I know in later episodes of standing on the tower, counting the planes, how invested he was in that whole process. And it's fun to watch in the show the character arc that really is your dad's real life and how he
So
developed.
I'd like to tell you a story. We got to meet Anthony at the LA premiere. And at the LA premiere, we only saw the first episode.
Okay.
So if you know the first episode, my father's not looking too hot. And we hadn't met him before that. And as Anthony approached us, it was pretty funny. Or we approached him, actually. We all walked over, and the first words out of his mouth, he immediately says, "Oh my God, I was so worried when I found out I was going to meet his kids, and they're only going to show you the first episode." He said, "I promise I don't throw up in every episode." And we said, "No, don't worry. We know the story." But he was relieved, I think, that we trusted that the story would tell it right. That, he started off as a young guy who did not have real strong skills and did not have confidence. And he grew. He just put his head down and he worked and he practiced and he got it. But meeting Anthony when he was kind of nervous about meeting us was fun.
How did your dad get involved in navigation? Because, when we're watching the show, like in the first episode, everyone is already in their spots, is already, has their role in the planes. And I'm curious as to, how your dad gravitated towards navigation. Was it something that a role he was put into, or is it because he had an education background, that he was smart?
Yeah, well, like a lot of them, he went in thinking he was going to be a pilot, and he walked out. He says in his book, I think it was like, I don't know, 17 minutes in the air or something. But he washed out as a pilot, and they took a lot of aptitude tests, and so that's the only thing I know. They kind of steered him toward navigation. I think with a lot of the guys that washed out as pilots, they often steered him towards navigation or bombardier. Those two roles. So that's how he got there. Washout, which he said he was grateful for because he didn't think he would have made it through if he'd stayed a pilot.
Yeah, I mean, watching the show, it's a wonder as many made it through as they did, just seeing how thin these planes were and everything going on. It's really shocking and amazing at the same time.
Would just concentrate on his job. He wouldn't think about what was going on around him. He would just concentrate on maps and his job was to get him to the bomb point and home. And that was it. He just tried to block everything else out.
Crazy to think about being a role player in a plane, getting shot at in the sky, dropping bombs. It's hard to focus sometimes at your desk job. I can't imagine that. Now, how did you first get contacted about Masters of the Air or the possibility of a show that would involve your dad?
I think I probably first heard that Hanks and Spielberg were looking at the 100th Bomb Group from the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. I'm pretty sure that's, we were sort of getting this, there was a rumor, you won't believe this, but Hanks and Spielberg, they're going to do a story about the 100th. And, of course we didn't believe it for a while. And then it was announced that it was real. And so, and we knew that we believed they had likely read my father's book, A Wing and a Prayer, which was first published in 1993. And it's the story from a navigator's perspective, which is a little unusual. Usually it's the pilots that get all the attention and tell the stories. And it's a good book. I mean, it's very easy read. It's a lot of individual stories. So we imagined that had something to do with, frankly, that they picked that bomb group. But in 2017, I attended one of the 100th Bomb Group Foundation reunions in quotes, because there aren't that many vets left. And I met Kurt Sadowski, and his first words to me were, "Oh yeah, I've read your dad's book. He'll be in the production." And, in the beginning, we just hoped that he wouldn't end up on the cutting room floor. So I said, "Hey, we'll give you anything we can, any way we can help you, we'll help you." I scanned a big stack of letters from my father to my mother to John Orloff, the writer, the screenwriter. We had some communication and some phone calls. And initially, we understood it was going to be primarily about three people, the two Buckies and Rosie. And I think the position of the navigator kind of grew. I mean, this fourth position kind of grew as they worked on the story. And then at some point they made him the narrator, which the narrator part, I'd sort of heard that was happening, but I didn't get a verification on that for quite a while.
So that was a little bit of a surprise that he took more of a role in leading the whole series.
Yeah, I mean, his role clearly emerged, through the process. It wasn't obvious at the beginning. But part of why he was chosen was because he was one of the few guys that was there from the beginning. He was an original. He was really proud that he was an original. That was a term they used for the guys that went over and first opened the base at Thorpe Abbott. So he was one of the originals, and he was there at the very end, which was very unusual. Either you got KIA, you were killed in action, or you were a POW, or if you were really lucky, you finished your missions and went home. But he didn't. He got promoted and he stayed. And so he provided the glue, if you will, for the other characters, because he was there from the beginning. He knew the Buckies, and he was there at the end. He knew Rosie. Rosie came, he was a replacement crew. He knew Rosie really well. So he was kind of the glue for the other characters.
Yeah, no, especially when, we're watching Masters of the Air, Crosby as the narrator, I think it's a great narrative choice, because when I'm watching this, I think, oh, this guy's an every guy. Like, I could be him. And I think that's such a good there's a good grounded quality to his character and his personality that I'm like, I could see myself being this guy. And, as kind of an audience entry point, I think that's a fantastic choice. Is your experience of your dad as being kind of this every guy that kind of serves as a grounding focus?
Yeah. I think that's fair. He was quite gregarious, in not like Bucky is. He wasn't like the drinker and the bars and stuff, but he loved people, and he loved to talk, and he loved, talking about serious things often, but he liked being around people. You couldn't get into a taxi cab without him, learning everything about the taxi guy and where he came from. And it got sort of embarrassing at times. So I think it does kind of fit. He would get along with everybody, pretty easily.
Yeah, I feel like it would be difficult to see someone portrayed after knowing the real person. Do you feel like Anthony Boyle captured some of that, or did you guys have any discussion before filming started of here's how my dad was, or did he just kind of read documents and take his own interpretation?
Well, we didn't meet him before. The four of us went over in 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, and we saw John and Kirk, and we saw the sites and the sets and stuff. But we didn't meet him at that time, so he didn't have any direct contact with family members. I do think, we've been warned that we shouldn't be looking for our father up on the screen. We have to remember we didn't know him when he was a 24-year-old freshly trained navigator. I think he was married for 43 days before he left.
Wow.
Literally. He was married for 43 days. Mom joined him for that last 43 days of training and saw him off when they left Kearney, Nebraska, the 100th group, to go over to England. So we have to remember, we don't know exactly what he was like when he was 20. So I think that makes it easier to look up and see. You're not really looking exactly at your dad. But I'll tell you, he did get sick all the time. That was accurate. He did get lost on the way to England. That was accurate. One of the prop people from England, I was talking to her, and she wanted to know, she was thinking about letters. They were going to be making props of letters from dad to mom or mom to dad or one way or the other. And she said, what did your mom call him in letters? Did she call him Dear Harry or Dear Sweetie? And I said, I never heard her call him Harry ever in my life. She called him Bing or Binger. And she said,
Okay.
Binger? I said, yeah. And he couldn't sing a note. But it was Bing Crosby era. So everybody called him Bing, but it's absolutely true. Sitting next to him in church was painful. I mean, that's how bad his singing was. So they captured a lot, I think.
I'm now glad they added that line in there from the first or second episode about the whole, oh yeah, you have a nickname, Bing, and then Bucky says, no, that's too easy. We can't go with that. So glad they had a little nod there to the real life.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true.
Have you watched the entire series already, or are you watching with everybody else?
No, we're watching with everybody else, which is killing me. John kind of went through each episode with us, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, so we have a screener link, as part of being in the media. So I've seen all of it. We just barely finished the series. I don't know if Madison has, but it gets into some things that I wonder from your perspective if it's going to be difficult to watch or if you just say maybe it's fictionalized or I don't want to know. Things with Harry and
No,
a
where you're
British
going.
spy. I always wonder, is that added for fictional purposes? Is it assumed? Is it just an explanation of what probably happened to servicemen, or how did that come about?
Well, there's a good story there.
Oh, good.
I don't know if you've read his book, but in his book,
I haven't yet.
he is not entirely clear about the relationship with the woman that he meets.
Okay.
And now, when I read that in the 90s, I was very busy. I was working full time. I had little kids. To be honest, I didn't even notice it. I mean, that's how crazy it was. In the book, he's unclear as to that relationship. When it came to the production, this is a great example of one of the calls I got from Kirk, which was, so what do you think? Where did that go? And I said, I don't know. I'll talk to my siblings and I'll get back to you. So we talked to the four of us got on the phone, and the brothers said, of course he did. He's 22, he's 24 years old. He thinks he's going to die tomorrow, legitimately. What do you think? And the girls, my sister and I, said, nah, he was very straight-laced. He was very much in love with my mother. His own story is that when he saw my mother across the room at the University of Iowa, he said to his friend, that's the girl I'm going to marry. And it took him 3 years, but she finally said yes. I mean, that's the truth. So our answer was, no. We think he wouldn't have done anything. So we said to the production, hey, look, go with it however you think. Frankly, we think it's kind of good to leave it up in the air, but you guys write. We're not the writers. And we understand he's representing, young men at war who think they're going to die tomorrow. So do with it as you may. We knew about that. We knew that whole piece. And the production was very respectful of the families. There are other examples with other families where they were kind of checking out storylines and stuff. I mean, they were really respectful. But we said, hey, do with it what you want.
Yeah, it definitely comes in smaller pieces through the latter episodes. I want to say episode 5, 6, and 7, or maybe it's 6, 7, 8. But that's good to know, and I always hope that everyone watches things based on true stories or inspired by true stories with the knowledge of it still is entertainment and people do things creatively to display a feeling or an emotion. But I definitely wondered about that one, and just the fact that there's a sensitivity that should be there while also making it entertainment, and there's kind of a difficult balance there, it feels like.
And I haven't actually seen it, so I don't know
Yeah.
exactly where it goes, but I can imagine.
Now, you talking about your dad and writing all these letters and kind of taking photos. Have you all sat down as kids and gone through all that before? Or is that kind of dad's things? We'll set that aside. That's his thing.
Well, my father saved everything. And by that, I mean, if he liked the service that he got from a Texaco station in 1954 when we were making a cross-country trip, he wrote that Texaco station a letter. And in 1954, he probably couldn't have made a copy of it. But when he was doing those kinds of things in 1974, he had his own copy machine and he made copies. So he had oceans of stuff for us to go through. I kind of have the biggest house, so I ended up, and I'm interested. I'm the family archivist, so it's all up in my attic. And so, what would happen is Kirk would email or call and say, "Hey, do you have any pictures of Harry with Jean before they were married?" Or he'd say, "Do you have a handwriting sample of your mother? The prop people need that." Or he'd say, do you have any audio of your father? We need to give that to the dialect coach." And I'd go traipsing up to the attic, looking for whatever it was they were wanting that day. So I don't think my siblings weren't so involved in, what did we hand over or not. I mean, basically, we were very interested, obviously, in supporting the production in any way we could. But I think the one thing I couldn't get for them that they asked me for was the address of where my mother lived in Chicago the year in 1943 to 44. She lived with Ev Blakely's wife. Ev Blakely was his pilot on Justice Snapping, and Howard Hamilton's wife. And Howard Hamilton's in this series too. He ended up on a different, crew. But the three wives lived together for a year, and they wanted me to find the address of where they lived that year, which I could not find.
Wow, that's a really specific request.
Oh, yeah, they were serious.
I mean, I love the dedication to the historical accuracy and wanting to get everything right, so I'm glad that they got you so involved. Now, having done this, do you see yourself seeing your dad in a different light, having gone through everything, or is it just reaffirm what you've already known?
I don't think I look at him too differently. A really strong characteristic of my father was he was the most optimistic person I have ever known. He just thought things were going to work out. And, he didn't have a particularly easy life. His older sister died when he was 4 or 5. He then was an only child. His parents got divorced when he was in high school or when he went off to college. His father, as I mentioned, was a pretty significant womanizer and gambler. Although my father also always said, and this is important, that he was the best father he could ever have. He just was the worst husband anybody could have.
Yeah.
But he just had this incredible optimism. And in fact, as an older man, I took him to visit some of his World War II friends, Charlie Crankshaft. He and I went to visit Dad a couple of times. And there was another guy, Danny's one of his World War II friends that I took him to visit. And I asked that guy, was he always this positive? Was he always this optimistic? Even way back during the war. And Danny said, yeah, it used to drive us crazy. And I don't know if that comes through as much. It hasn't so much in the first 4 episodes. But that's what I took from my dad is, he just was positive. He just would look at the positive side. And I don't think that's really changed from this experience. But it's got to be part of what got him through the war. I have to believe.
Yeah, it definitely feels watching the series and talking to other veterans, or I'm watching other videos of bomb groups and things. And I know we've mentioned on this podcast before the statistics or the projected lifetime of a bomber pilot was not great. The average was 5 to 7 missions before being shot down, which is just terrible, terrible odds. So I think it does, and having watched the rest of the series, it does show his positivity and his attitude and dedication to keeping the boys safe, keeping his friends safe, getting them home, finding the best route the whole way through, which is just impressive to watch because I think it is a different time. And for whatever reason, there's something locked in our minds of World War II being kind of the end of this generation of wars of honor and young boys and forced to go and fighting the real, true, definite evil that I don't think we really had as clearly since then.
Yeah, we grew up during the Vietnam War, and
Yeah.
I think it was hard initially for my father to accept particularly one of my brothers being very outspoken against the war very early on. But he came around pretty fast. He didn't like war. He did not see it as a solution. Yeah. So he had very wonderful experiences in terms of the camaraderie and the commitment to a purpose that none of us will ever even be able to experience, I don't think. And that was really valuable, but he didn't glorify war worth anything. And so he didn't want us going to war for no good reason.
Which is a good perspective. And I think it's nice to know and to see that not everyone who's gone to war is a fan of doing it. My brother-in-law served over in Afghanistan and he doesn't own a gun. And it's not what you originally think of. Those who go to war must want war, but it's usually different people sending them over there. And it's stepping up to protect your friends and your loved ones, not so much enjoying the process of what's going on.
Yeah, I think, again, and his book is pretty interesting in that he doesn't glorify it. He has a lot of questions still, I think. He knows he destroyed cities. He knows that he killed innocent people. I never heard him talk about it, but he does reflect on it in the book some. He doesn't look at it lightly. And yet he's proud of what they did, appropriately, I think.
Yeah, you shared that quote with me from the end of the Boston premiere. I can read it or you can read it.
Toward the end of his book, he summarized, I remember the cities we destroyed and the German poets and inventors we stilled. But I remember the time we went to the edge when we put our lives on the line for a cause that we believed to be just. I remember my friends, those who made it through and those who did not. I remember the tragedies and the horror, but I also remember the laughter. Pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. No better way to sum up what this show is trying to show. The loss of life and innocence, but it is those friendships and interpersonal relationships that helped everybody get through it.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, and I think that quote also serves to show why your dad was such a great inclusion in this show, is that he definitely showed up, did his job and his role, but he maintained some humanity throughout it all and was in touch with kind of this central human core. And I think that's why he's such a relatable character on screen and also such a great model for us to kind of project our hopes and our wishes onto. And when we're watching the show, I think that's really great and profound.
But I thank you. I think part of it is that it's not like we want to build him up to something bigger or grander or something than he was. We're all human and he wasn't perfect, but he's, he stepped up and he helped get a lot of people through that. And, we're proud. We're very proud. And we're also proud of all the millions of other guys who did it too. And he would want them to be remembered. I think he would, he loved being in the center of things. I always used to kind of joke that that, you know, he liked to be in the middle of things, but he also wanted everybody else to get credit too.
Like you're saying, there's so many people involved, so many lives involved, lost, and those who carried on afterwards. And I think the show does a good job of showing us a snapshot of just some of these people who were just normal people being involved in this heroic effort to overthrow evil and to
Yeah,
save the world.
kind of amazing.
Well, I thank you again for spending some time with us today to talk about it and for all the work you've done with the production. I can say, having finished it, it definitely paid off. It feels
Thank
real.
you.
It's got such great stories of these characters and emotional moments, and the actors did a great job. But I think the reality of each person and all that you see of them in the show definitely comes from people like you who have helped pitch in to make it more than just a fictionalized story about World War II. It's a true story told through a fictionalized lens, but still gives us a little peek at someone that we know as a veteran and that you knew as your father.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to sort of share our experience and our appreciation, frankly, for Playtone and the work that they did, and the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. You know, we've all pitched in on this, and it's been a great experience. So thank you.
I bet. And thank you so much.
You're welcome.